We're going to talk a little bit today about Ilhan Omar, who was...
Oh, and by the way, Ilhan Omar was one of the people that co-signed for Tulsi Gabbard's bill, too.
And the INF bill?
Yeah, on INF.
That's very cool.
Yes.
That's very cool. So, with regard to Venezuela and the United States recognizing Juan Guaido as the president there, despite the fact that he was not elected as such, Elliott Abrams was appointed as the special envoy for Venezuela, and he appeared before the House Committee on Foreign Relations Wednesday. It was kind of an amazing exchange. If you can look it up online, Ilhan Omar had some choice questions for him. She noted that Abrams pled guilty in 1991 to withholding information about the Iran-Contra affair from Congress, and said that she fails to understand, quote, why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful. And she was right to be skeptical of what he had to say, because he ended up lying to her in the very few questions that he had for her. She had some very pointed questions. So she was talking about, in February of '82, he testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about the U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, this is a quote, in that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda reports about the massacre at El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girls before they killed them. You later said that U.S. policy in El Salvador was, quote, a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so? Abrams' response to that was, from the day President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement. That is just not a true statement. Duarte was not elected in a free election.
Are you telling me that he was basically appointed by the United States government?
Yeah, this is the first time anyone under oath has ever lied.
Oh my goodness.
Breaking. No, so that's The Intercept correctly points out that Abrams' words were not only factually, demonstrably untrue, but grossly so. And that's according to Alejandro Velasco, who's a professor of modern Latin American history. And he says, quote, it continues a pattern he has shown since the 1980s of habitually rejecting out of hand any suggestion that defeating social justice struggles in the 80s through the most brutal means should in any way be seen as anything other than a resounding victory for the United States. So basically, a little bit of history on Duarte. He was he ended up becoming the head of a junta slightly before that election, an election where, as this basically far-right extremist Contra, he was the furthest left candidate in the election, basically because anyone who came out who was a moderate, a centrist, or even anyone on the ideological left would have been assassinated by these juntas. You know, there was no way that anyone who was not a member of these sort of cultish death squads was going to have any, was going to be able to live. It'd be like if we had a U.S. presidential election. This is The Intercept's editorializing. He said, and the furthest left candidate was Ted Cruz.
Think about that. Ted Cruz. Good old Lion Ted who lost to Trump. Ugh.
Yep. So it's a really fantastic video, and it's really worth checking out. Ilhan Omar made a lot of headlines this past week. We'll talk about the other major one in a minute here, but this was the other big one.
You know, I want everyone to remember just how the media has been attacking Ilhan Omar. Same thing how they're going after AOC. You know, a lot of these war criminals that we have, both in the Democratic and Republican establishment, usually get a slap on the wrist or then are put on TV as political analysis because you know, they're basically, you know, just there as talking heads, and I think it's just downright disgusting, you know, Paul.
Yeah, and I think Omar's correct to dress down Abrams here, because he is about the worst person that you could ever ask to be heading a special envoy to Venezuela. I mean, given his criminal involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, his demonstrable lying to Congress on multiple occasions, his vicious and fierce tactics that are unethical on multiple levels, there's no reason that this person should be trusted in this capacity at all in any way. And Omar was absolutely right to publicly admonish him in front of the House Committee on Foreign Relations.
Yeah, and here's a couple other things we can take away from this too, is that here you have a United States representative actually holding somebody accountable. And again, this guy is lying under oath. And I wonder, will he be held accountable for lying again and again and again and again? Remember, all these coups that happened, all these war crimes that happened was done under the American taxpayer's dollar. So we all need to be vocal about this, and we need more people like Ilhan Omar to step up and fight back. At least she's leading the charge. At least he's stepping up and being vocal about this and really talking about the crisis that we did. And you know, but again, you know, just to lead the point to one of the first stories we covered during the second hour, the United States isn't learning its lesson. I mean, we still want to do it in Iran, do another regime change. Same thing in Venezuela. And it doesn't matter so long as the U.S. interests are put ahead of anyone else's interests. The only people that are going to benefit from any regime change are the top 1%, the military-industrial complex, and all the lobbyists that donate to our politicians. And you know what this goes back to again, everyone? Money in politics, because war is profitable for both the Democratic and Republican establishment. And thankfully, there's progressives right now in the United States House and Senate stepping up and voicing out their concerns and trying to get legislation done. Look, this is a shout out to Democratic voters, Republican voters, independent voters, Libertarian voters, Green Party voters, Socialist voters, you name it. Look, we all don't want the world to be destroyed, and we all don't want our neighbors to look at us with contempt, thinking that we just are just turning a blind eye to this. This is where we all have to step up and actually elect representatives in the United States Senate and House, President, and also on the state level that are actually going to represent us and actually hold those that have continued this neoliberal, neoconservative government accountable. Because what they're doing is wrong, and we as Americans have a right to step up. Remember, these people in office are public servants. They work for us. And so when we see Representative Ilhan Omar actually grilling one of these war criminals and holding them accountable, that's called responsible government. That's called holding somebody accountable. So hopefully, you know, we see more of this. Paul, do you have any other final notes?
Yeah, one thing we haven't really mentioned yet that I think is worth noting is anytime someone lies for the behest of the oil industry, it will be forgiven, right? It is acceptable. So Abrams' tactics in the past, Abrams' current tactics, his continuing to lie, and the expectation that he will use underhanded, unethical, and potentially illegal, or at least internationally illegal, war crime tactics to achieve his goals in Venezuela will not be met with condemnation from the Trump administration for sure, but also I don't expect it to come from condemnation from most of the establishment either, because it will do nothing but suppress a sovereign nation in South America and provide cheaper oil here in the United States if he's successful. We need your support to help fight back against the military-industrial complex.